For months, Sergeant Arturo was sustained by a single dream: to return home. He dreamed of surprising his little daughter, Paloma, and seeing the pure joy in her eyes. He imagined her laughter, a warm home, and the embrace that would erase the distance and loneliness of war. But the scene he found through a dusty window was not one from a fairy tale. He did not see a plate of hot food, but a metal bowl on the floor that would shatter his soul. The soldier's reaction to that sight was not one of anger, but of a pain so profound it made an entire neighborhood weep. This is the story of how a father's heart was broken, and the justice that was born from its pieces. The smell of chlorine and pine stung Paloma's nostrils, an aroma too strong for such a small kitchen. At her young age, her knees were already acquainted with the hardness of every terracotta tile in her Aunt Beatrice's house. She moved with a meticulousness that belied her age, scrubbing the floor with an old rag, making sure not to leave a single spot. Every movement was deliberate, silent, designed not to draw attention. Being invisible was the best way to survive in this house. Her Aunt Beatrice sat at the table, drinking a strong coffee. She wasn't reading the newspaper or watching the small television humming in the corner. She was simply observing Paloma, her lips pressed into a thin line of perpetual disapproval. The silence in the room was heavy, dense, broken only by the soft scraping of the rag against the floor. "Faster, girl," Beatrice said suddenly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "I don't have all day to watch you crawl like a worm." Paloma didn't answer, only nodding slightly as her small hands moved with more urgency, her heart hammering in her chest. Fear was a constant companion, a cold shadow that clung to her even under the relentless Jalisco sun. After finishing the floor, her next task was to wash the breakfast dishes. She had to drag a small wooden stool to reach the sink. The water was cold, but she was used to it. As she washed an old, chipped plate, her small, wet fingers lost their grip for an instant. The plate slipped, hit the edge of the sink with a sharp clack, and split into two clean halves. The sound seemed to resonate throughout the house. Paloma froze, her eyes wide, fixed on the broken porcelain. The air escaped her lungs. Beatrice rose from her chair with a menacing slowness. She walked to the sink, looking first at the pieces of the plate and then at her niece's terrified face. "But what have you done, you useless thing?" Her hand shot out and gripped Paloma's small arm with brutal force. Beatrice's nails dug into her skin. "You can't do anything right. Do you know how much things cost? Your father sends me money, but it's not for you to go around destroying my house, do you understand?" Tears welled up in Paloma's eyes, but she knew she shouldn't let them fall. Crying only made things worse. "I'm sorry, Auntie. It slipped." "It slipped," Beatrice mocked, mimicking her small voice. "You always have an excuse. Now pick up every piece, and there will be no dinner for you tonight. You will learn to take care of things." She released her arm with a shove that made her stagger. With trembling hands, Paloma picked up the broken pieces, feeling a sharp cut on her finger. A small drop of blood welled up, red and bright against the white ceramic. She watched it for a second before squeezing her finger tightly to stop it. She didn't complain, she never complained. Later, when the house fell silent and her aunt left for the store with her children, Diego and Valeria, Paloma ran to her room. It wasn't really a room, but a small storage closet at the back of the house with a narrow bed and a single high window that only let in a sliver of dusty light. Underneath her thin pillow, she kept her only treasure. With utmost care, she took out a faded photograph. In it, a young man in a military uniform smiled with the desert sun at his back. Her father, Arturo. The edges of the photo were soft and worn from the constant touch of her fingers. She sat on the bed and brought the photo to her face, brushing the smiling cheek of her father with her fingertip. "Hello, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I broke a plate today." Aunt Beatrice got very angry. "But I'm okay. I wish you were here." She closed her eyes, trying to remember the sound of his laughter, the feel of his big, warm hands lifting her into the air. Those memories were a balm for her wounded soul, a small fire she kept alive in the darkness of her loneliness. The photo was her shield, her proof that somewhere in the world, someone loved her. It was the only reason she endured each day. Next door, in the adjoining house, Dona Consuelo was watering her vibrant bougainvillea. She was a woman of 70 years with a back bent by time, but with eyes that missed nothing. From her kitchen window, which overlooked Beatrice's patio, she had been a silent witness to many things. She had seen little Paloma always alone, always working. She had seen her sweep the patio under the scorching sun while her cousins played. She had seen her wearing old, worn-out clothes, either too big or too small. And more than once, she had noticed the way the child flinched whenever her aunt came near. That afternoon, she saw Paloma go out to the backyard to take out the trash. She saw her small figure move like a shadow, her shoulders slumped. She saw the red stain on her finger and the way she hid it. The old woman's heart ached. She knew about abuse, not from reading about it, but from having lived it and seen it throughout her life. As she watched the girl disappear back into the house, Dona Consuelo sighed, and a melancholic thought formed in her mind, a truth polished by decades of observing human nature. Sometimes, she thought to herself as the water from her can darken the dry earth, the deepest scars are the invisible ones, and the most painful cry is the one choked back in silence. She didn't know what she could do, but she felt in her old bones that the girl's silent sadness was a storm that, sooner or later, was going to break. And she prayed that when it did, there would be someone there to protect her. 3 days had passed since the plate incident. 3 days in which Paloma's dinner had consisted of a glass of water and a piece of dry bread she ate secretly in her room. Hunger was a dull knot in her stomach, but it was her aunt's silence that weighed on her the most. Beatrice had not spoken a word to her, simply watching her with an icy gaze that followed her everywhere, a constant reminder of her crime. That afternoon, as Paloma was dusting the living room furniture, the sharp ring of the landline phone broke the silence. It was a sound that should bring joy, a connection to the outside world, but for Paloma, it sounded like an alarm siren. Beatrice, who was in the kitchen, came out wiping her hands on her apron. A strange transformation occurred on her face. The hardness of her features softened. Her lips curved into a forced smile, and her eyes took on an artificial sparkle. It was the mask she wore for the outside world. She walked to the phone, but before answering, she leaned towards Paloma. "It's your father," she whispered, her breath smelling of coffee and threat. "You know what you have to say. That you're happy, that I take good care of you, that you love me very much." She grabbed Paloma's chin and forced her to look at her. "Your father is a soldier. He's far away, fighting for us. He doesn't need your silly little girl complaints. He needs to know his daughter is safe and grateful. If you say a single word out of place, if I hear a single sob, I swear, Paloma, I'll make you regret it for the rest of the month. Understood?" Paloma nodded, swallowing hard. The lump in her throat was as painful as the hunger in her stomach. Beatrice smiled, satisfied, and picked up the phone. "Arturo, my dear brother, how are you?" Her voice was a torrent of honey and affection. "What a joy to hear your voice." Yes, we're all fine. Your niece here sends you lots of kisses. Do you want to talk to her?" "Of course. She'll be thrilled." She handed the receiver to Paloma. The plastic felt cold and heavy in her trembling hand. She brought it to her ear while Beatrice stood beside her, arms crossed, watching her every move. "Dad?" Paloma said, her voice barely a thread. "My Paloma, my princess." Arturo's voice boomed through the line, warm, full of life, and a love so immense it physically hurt Paloma. "I miss you so much, my heaven. How is my beautiful girl?" "I'm fine, Dad," she managed to say. "Yes, you're being good for your aunt. She told me you're a big help around the house." Paloma glanced at Beatrice, who nodded slowly with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, Dad. That's my girl. Hey, and what did you eat today? Did your aunt make those enchiladas you love so much? The memory of dry bread and water filled her mind. Yes, they were very delicious. That's great, my daughter. I'm glad she's spoiling you. And tell me, did she buy you the flower dress we saw online? I sent the money last week so you'd have it for the town festival. Paloma knew nothing about any dress. She saw her cousins Diego and Valeria walk down the hall in shiny new sneakers. Yes, Dad, she bought it for me. It's very pretty. I want to see a picture. Tell your aunt to send me one. Arturo's laughter sounded distant, happy, completely oblivious to reality. Well, my love, I have to go. The connection isn't very good here, but I want you to know that I love you more than anything in the world. Be good, I'll call you soon. I love you too, Dad, Paloma whispered. And that was the only truth she told in the entire conversation. A single tear slid down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with the back of her other hand before Beatriz could see it. Goodbye, princess. The line went silent. Paloma stood with the receiver in her hand as if she wanted to cling to the last echoes of her father's voice. Beatriz snatched it from her abruptly and hung it up. The mask was gone. Well done, she said coldly. It seems you're good for something, at least. Now get back to your work. The next day, Beatriz's cell phone pinged. It was the notification of Arturo's monthly transfer. Paloma saw her aunt look at the screen with a smile of genuine satisfaction, a smile she never gave her. That same afternoon, Beatriz took Diego and Valeria to the town square. Paloma watched them from the living room window, the one she was forbidden to open. She saw her aunt buy her cousins a large glass of fresh horchata each and prepared corn on the cob with mayonnaise, cheese, and chili. She heard them laugh as Diego showed off his new soccer ball and Valeria wore a shiny headband in her hair. They were using her father's money, the money for her flower dress. The world on the other side of the glass seemed vibrant and full of color, while hers was gray and silent. That night, in the loneliness of her room, Paloma took out the photograph again. Her father's voice, so full of love and so deceived, echoed in her ears. The pain was different now. It wasn't just her aunt's cruelty or her father's absence. It was a new and terrible burden, guilt. She was part of the lie. Her silence protected her tormentor and deceived her savior. She hugged the photo tightly against her chest, as if her father's smiling face could absorb the bitterness she felt. The love he sent her across miles of desert and oceans reached her, but it was intercepted and poisoned before it could heal her. And she, with her silence, helped the poison to spread. School was the only place where Paloma felt a glimmer of normalcy, even though she herself was not a normal child. In the bustle of the playground during recess, while other children ran, shouted, and laughed, she sought the quietest corner under the shade of an old pepper tree. She would sit with her knees hugged to her chest and take out a small notebook and a worn-out pencil. She didn't draw flowers or houses with smiling suns like the other girls. She drew a man in uniform over and over, sometimes in a desert, sometimes on a ship, always with the same warm smile he had in the photograph she kept under her pillow. Mrs. Romero, her first-grade teacher, often watched her from the classroom window. She had been teaching for 20 years and had learned to read the silent language of children. In Paloma, she saw not just shyness, but an ancient sadness, a weight on her small shoulders that shouldn't be there. She noticed her clothes, always clean but visibly worn in secondhand. She noticed her thinness and the way she never talked about her home, deflecting any questions with a shrug. One Tuesday morning, Mrs. Romero's opportunity to inquire presented itself unavoidably. During reading class, she asked Paloma to hand out the books to her classmates. As the girl stretched to reach a book on the top shelf, the sleeve of her sweater slipped down, revealing an ugly mark on her upper arm. It wasn't a scrape from a fall, it was a dark, purplish bruise, in the unmistakable shape of fingers that had squeezed too hard. Mrs. Romero felt a chill. She maintained her composure until the recess bell rang. While the other children ran out to the playground, she asked Paloma to stay for a moment. She knelt to be at her level. Her voice was soft, like a caress. "Paloma, honey, can we talk for a second?" Paloma stiffened instantly. Her large brown eyes filled with panic. She nodded without speaking. "I saw the mark on your little arm," the teacher said, pointing gently. "How did you get that, my child?" Paloma's mind became a whirlwind. Her aunt's voice echoed in her head, clear and threatening. "If you say a single word." Fear fought against the desperate desire to tell everything, to ask for help, but fear was stronger. It was a poison she had learned to obey. I fell," she whispered, looking down at the floor. "I was playing on the playground and I fell." "Are you sure, Paloma?" Mrs. Romero insisted gently. "It looks more like someone held you very tightly. You know you can tell me anything. I'm here to help you." Tears stung Paloma's eyes. She wanted to scream the truth. She wanted to say, "It was my aunt. She hates me." But the words got stuck in her throat, choked by terror. She shook her head, clinging to the lie. "It was just a fall, teacher. I'm very clumsy." Mrs. Romero sighed. Her heart ached for the child. She didn't believe her, but she knew that forcing her would only scare her more. The protocol was clear. She had to speak with her guardian. That same afternoon, Beatriz arrived at the school. She entered the classroom with an expression of deep, feigned concern on her face. "Mrs. Romero, thank you for calling me," she said, her voice full of false warmth. "I was sick with worry. Did something happen to my Paloma?" "Please, sit down, ma'am," the teacher said, maintaining a professional tone. "I called you because I'm a little worried about Paloma. Today I noticed a rather large bruise on her arm." Beatriz let out a theatrical gasp and brought a hand to her chest. "Oh, my goodness. This child again. I've told her 1,000 times. Be more careful when you play. She's so clumsy, teacher, you have no idea. She's always falling, tripping. Her body is full of little marks from her rough games." "I understand," said Mrs. Romero, unconvinced. "But I've also noticed that she's very quiet, very withdrawn. She rarely plays with the other children." Beatriz sighed dramatically, as if she were carrying the weight of the world. She even managed to make a fake tear glisten in the corner of her eye. "It's because she misses her father so much, my brother Arturo. Since he left, she's become very sensitive. I do everything I can, really. I treat her as if she were my own daughter, but it's difficult. It's a great responsibility for me with my other 2 children." Suddenly her tone changed, becoming offended. "Are you implying something, teacher?" "No, of course not," Mrs. Romero hurried to say, feeling cornered. "My duty is only to make sure the children are well." "Well, you can rest assured," Beatriz said, standing up and regaining her composure. Her voice was now cold. "I take perfect care of my niece, she is my blood. I would appreciate it if you did not cast doubt on my family again." Beatriz's performance was impeccable. She left Mrs. Romero feeling powerless and almost guilty for having suspected. Without proof, with the child's denial and the aunt's convincing act, her hands were tied. The glimmer of hope had been extinguished. That night, when Beatriz got home, she found Paloma finishing setting the table for dinner. She didn't yell at her, she didn't punish her. She simply walked up to her and, with an icy smile that didn't reach her eyes, whispered in her ear. "You see what happens when people stick their noses where they don't belong." The little teacher believed my whole story. She leaned in closer. "You were lucky today. Don't forget it." The whisper was more terrifying than any scream. Paloma felt a glacial chill run down her spine. She had understood the message. There was no escape. The trap had closed a little tighter around her. The afternoon sun beat down on the small town, forcing most people to seek refuge in their homes. But on her own porch, sitting in her rhythmically creaking wooden rocking chair, Dona Consuelo watched. Her gaze wasn't lost on the dusty street, but fixed on the house next door. She saw little Paloma come out with a laundry basket almost as big as she was, struggling to carry it to the clothesline in the backyard. She saw her little arms tremble with the effort, how she stood on her tiptoes to hang her aunt's and cousin's sheets. A little while later, Carmen, a younger neighbor who lived across the street, came out to sweep her entrance. She saw Dona Consuelo and approached, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Good afternoon, Dona Consuelo." "It's so hot today," Carmen greeted, leaning on her broom. "Good afternoon, my dear," the old woman replied without taking her eyes off Paloma. "The heat outside is nothing compared to what some carry inside." Carmen followed her gaze and sighed. "Poor creature, always working. Doesn't it seem strange to you, Carmen?" Dona Consuelo asked in a low voice, as if sharing a secret. "Don't you think that girl is too quiet? I never hear her laugh, I never see her play. Her cousins run around the street all day, but she's like a little shadow in that house." Carmen lowered her voice too, looking up and down the street. "Yes, it breaks my heart too. The other day, my son invited her to play marbles, and the girl just shook her head and ran back into the house. A minute later, her Aunt Beatriz came out and gave us a look that could freeze the sun." She paused and added the phrase that always ended these conversations. "But what can you do, Dona Consuelo? Beatriz is her family, her father's sister. It's not good to meddle in other people's business. We could cause more problems for the girl." Dona Consuelo nodded slowly, a deep sadness in her eyes. She knew that logic. It was the invisible wall that protected the darkest secrets of many families. People saw, people whispered, but no one acted. And meanwhile, Paloma's little shadow continued to fade a little more each day. Hundreds of miles away, on a dusty military base in the north of the country, Sergeant Arturo was folding a T-shirt with military precision, but his mind was elsewhere. It was in a small town in Jalisco with his daughter. His friend and platoon mate, Gabriel, was sitting on the bunk next to him, cleaning his rifle. "You've got that faraway look again, brother," Gabriel said without looking up. "Thinking about your daughter?" Arturo sighed. "Always, Gabriel. Always." He took his wallet from his pocket and from it, the photograph of Paloma. He looked at it for the umpteenth time, her smile, her bright eyes. 2 days ago, I received a package from my sister. It was supposed to be from Paloma. And didn't it make you happy?" "It wasn't from her," Arturo said, his voice sounding hollow. Inside was a drawing, some poorly made flowers with gaudy colors. It wasn't her style. Paloma draws with more detail, more heart. And a typed note from Beatriz saying that Paloma was too busy playing to write to me herself. Arturo shook his head. "My daughter is never too busy for me, and she knows how to write my name. She always puts it on her drawings." Gabriel stopped cleaning his rifle and looked at him. "Maybe you're just overthinking it." "I don't know," Arturo admitted. "But for weeks I've had this uneasiness, a strange feeling in my chest that won't let me sleep. The phone call the other day, her voice sounded subdued. My sister says she's happy, but I feel like something's not right. It's a gut feeling. You know, the kind you get on the battlefield right before everything goes to." He stared at the photo, the worn paper almost transparent from the sweat of his hands. The girl's smile in the photo seemed like a silent plea. In that instant, he made a decision. The world could wait, duty could wait. His daughter could not. He stood up with sudden determination. "I'm going to see her." Gabriel stood up too. "What? Just like that?" "Just like that," Arturo confirmed. "I'm going to request emergency leave. I'll say it's her birthday or there's a family emergency. I don't care what I have to invent. I feel like I have to go now. It's a long trip, Arturo. I know, but I can't ignore this feeling. I'd rather be wrong and find her happy and playing than stay here and it be too late. Gabriel put a hand on his shoulder. Do what you have to do, brother. I'll cover for you here. An hour later, with a backpack on his shoulder and an approved emergency leave in his pocket, Arturo was boarding a bus that would take him on the first leg of his long journey home. As the vehicle started moving, kicking up a cloud of dust, he settled into his seat and closed his eyes. He didn't think about abuse, or his sister, or his strange suspicions. He only thought about his daughter's face when she opened the door and saw him there. He thought about her cry of joy, her little arms around his neck, the smell of her hair. It was going to be the best surprise in the world. He smiled to himself, oblivious to the storm that awaited him, traveling with a heart full of a pure and luminous hope that would soon be shattered to pieces. The journey was long and exhausting, an odyssey of almost 24 hours across the vast and changing geography of Mexico. The first bus, large and modern, devoured the endless straightaways of the northern desert highways, a landscape of infinite skies that was all too familiar to Arturo. He tried to sleep, but the excitement and that persistent unease in his chest kept him awake. Instead, he stared out the window, watching small towns and lonely ranches pass by, each a small universe of unknown lives. His thoughts were a whirlwind of memories and hopes. He remembered the last time he had seen Paloma, at the noisy bus station just before leaving on his last deployment. She was so small, clinging to his leg, her big brown eyes full of tears she refused to shed, trying to be brave for her soldier dad. He had promised her he would be back soon. He had promised that her Aunt Beatriz would take care of her like a queen. That promise now weighed like lead in his stomach. He imagined their reunion over and over. He pictured Paloma playing in the yard, maybe in the flower dress he thought she had. He would surprise her from behind, lift her into the air, and spin her around until her laughter filled the air. It was that laughter he missed the most, a pure, crystalline sound he felt he hadn't heard in an eternity. He took out his wallet and looked at the photo again. His daughter's smile was his beacon, his reason for enduring the distance and the danger. At every stop, street vendors boarded the bus offering pork rinds, tamarind candies, and soft drinks in plastic bags. Arturo bought nothing, he had no appetite. The only hunger he felt was to be home. After a transfer in Guadalajara, the landscape began to change. The desert gave way to the green, rolling fields of Jalisco. The air became more humid, more familiar. He took an older, noisier local bus that stopped in every town. The journey slowed, but his heart began to beat faster. He recognized the names of the towns, the curves in the road, the familiar trees. Finally, the bus dropped him off in the small square of his hometown. The afternoon sun bathed the church facade in a golden light and cast long shadows from the laurel trees surrounding the central gazebo. Everything was quiet, almost sleepy. The air smelled of damp earth and the carnitas someone was cooking nearby. For a moment, a sense of peace washed over him. He was home. He walked through the cobbled streets, his military backpack on his shoulder. He nodded to a couple of older men playing dominoes at a table outside a store. He recognized Don Nacho's bakery, the pharmacy, the hardware store. Everything was exactly as he remembered it, an orderly and peaceful world. The normality of the place calmed his nerves a little. Maybe Gabriel was right, maybe he was just overthinking, paranoid from the distance. Then he turned the corner of the street where his sister lived. It was a quiet street, with brightly colored houses and well-tended gardens. He saw Beatriz's house at the end of the block, its facade painted a cheerful peach color with pots of red geraniums in the windows. It looked so normal, so harmless. He reached the front door and raised his hand to ring the bell, but he stopped. The idea of the surprise, the one he had rehearsed in his mind throughout the journey, returned with force. He didn't want to announce himself. He wanted to steal a glimpse of his daughter's happiness before revealing himself. He wanted to see her in her world, playing, laughing, oblivious to his arrival. It would be a gift for him, a precious memory to treasure. It was a decision born of the purest love, and it was the decision that changed everything. Instead of knocking, he backed away silently and walked down the narrow concrete path that ran along the side of the house, the one that separated Beatrice's property from Dona Consuelo's. The path was in the shade and the air was cooler. A few weeds had grown in the cracks of the concrete. His military boots made a soft, dull sound on the surface. The bark of a dog in the distance and the buzz of a fly were the only sounds. The path ended in the backyard. From there, he could see the kitchen door and, next to it, the window. The curtain was half drawn, allowing a partial view of the interior. Perfect. His heart was pounding with unbridled force, a mixture of nerves and overwhelming joy. He was just a few feet, just a few seconds away from seeing his Paloma. He crouched down slowly, a huge, expectant smile on his face, preparing for the moment he had dreamed of for months. With the care of a soldier on a reconnaissance mission, he approached the window, ready to peek in and behold the happy family scene he had traveled hundreds of miles to witness. With a smile that filled his entire face, Arturo peeked over the edge of the kitchen window. His mind was prepared for an explosion of joy, for the image of his daughter playing or perhaps helping her aunt prepare a snack. The first thing he saw was his sister Beatriz, her back to him, standing in front of the stove. Arturo's heart leaped with anticipation. He scanned the room for Paloma, expecting to see her sitting at the table drawing, but the table was empty. The floor was too. He frowned in confusion. Where was she? He moved a little, trying to get a better angle, and then he saw her. His world stopped. Paloma wasn't playing, she wasn't drawing. She was on the floor, in the farthest corner of the kitchen, next to the back door. She was huddled in a ball, so small she looked like an abandoned rag doll. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of bewilderment. Why was she on the floor? Was she being punished? His eyes, trained to catch every detail on a battlefield, began to register the scene with horrifying clarity. He noticed his daughter's shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He noticed the object in front of her on the floor. A metal bowl, old, dented. The bowl of his sister's dog, Capitan, an old Labrador that had died the year before. For a second, his brain refused to process the information. It made no sense. It was a surreal image, a waking nightmare. Then he heard his sister's voice, and it wasn't the sweet, warm voice he had heard on the phone. It was an unrecognizable voice, sharp as broken glass, laden with a glacial poison. "Eat, you useless thing," Beatrice hissed without even turning to look at the child. "I told you to finish it all. That's all you deserve for talking back to your cousin. Now eat it all, or you'll be locked in your room until tomorrow." Arturo's mind went blank. Beatrice's words were like hammer blows, shattering the reality he knew. The air became thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. He watched in slow motion as Paloma's small, trembling hand reached for the metal bowl. He saw her dirty, thin fingers pick up one of the small, brown, dry pellets. He saw her bring the piece of kibble to her mouth as silent tears traced paths on her dusty cheeks. Dog food. His daughter was eating dog food. Arturo's universe fractured. The buzz of the fly, the distant bark, the smell of damp earth, it all disappeared. His hearing vanished, replaced by a sharp, deafening ringing. His vision narrowed to a dark tunnel with that unbearable image burning at its center. His little Paloma, his princess, his treasure, being treated worse than an animal. The first wave was not anger, it was a pain so deep and absolute that it stole his breath and buckled his knees. A choked sob, a guttural, broken sound, escaped his throat. It wasn't a scream, it was the sound of a soul being torn apart, the primal lament of a father witnessing the desecration of what he loves most in the world. The love, hope, and joy that had driven him on his long journey turned to ash in an instant. And from those ashes, fury was born, a white-hot, pure, volcanic fury. The soldier's discipline evaporated, replaced by the primordial instinct of a protector. His blood boiled, his muscles tensed like steel cables. Sadness turned into an explosive force. He didn't think. He acted. He took 2 steps back from the window, his body moving with a lethal grace. He didn't reach for the doorknob. He didn't scream his sister's name. He channeled all his pain, all his rage, all his betrayed trust into a single, devastating movement. He lunged forward and slammed his military boot into the center of the kitchen door. The sound of splintering wood was like an explosion. The door flew off its hinges as if struck by a battering ram, flying into the kitchen and crashing against the opposite wall. The doorframe was left in tatters. In the shattered doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, Arturo appeared like a specter of vengeance. His face was a mask of fury and a pain so immense it was terrifying to behold. His eyes, normally warm and kind, now burned like live coals. Beatriz spun around with a choked scream. The color drained from her face, replaced by absolute, mortal panic at the sight of her brother, whom she believed to be hundreds of miles away, standing in the midst of the destruction. Paloma, on the floor, looked up, frightened by the crash. Her teary eyes widened like saucers. Through her veil of tears, she saw the imposing figure in the doorway. Confusion, fear, and disbelief fought on her small face. "Dad," she whispered, the word barely a puff of air, an incredulous question in the midst of hell. The echo of the shattered door and Paloma's incredulous whisper seemed to hang in the thick, charged air of the kitchen for an eternity. Time froze in that tableau of confrontation, the father like an avenging angel, the aunt paralyzed by terror, and the child on the floor at the epicenter of the earthquake. It was Beatriz who broke the silence. Raw, animal panic seized her, compelling her to weave a desperate web of lies. "Arturo, brother, for God's sake, it's not what it looks like," she shrieked, her voice high and trembling. She took a hesitant step toward him, her hands raised as if to calm a wild beast. "I swear, it's a game, a silly game she has. I found her playing with the dog's food, and I was scolding her. That's all. She was just playing, I tell you." The lies tumbled from her mouth, clumsy and transparent, crashing against Arturo's wall of silence. He didn't look at her. To him, in that moment, his sister had ceased to exist. She was background noise, an insignificant interference. His entire universe had shrunk to the small, trembling figure on the floor. With heavy steps that echoed on the linoleum, he ignored Beatriz as if she were air and walked over the wooden remains of the door he himself had destroyed. He knelt in front of Paloma. The furious giant who had kicked down the door vanished. In his place was a father on his knees before his wounded daughter. The fury in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a pain as vast as the ocean. He extended his large hand, calloused from work and weapons, and with infinite tenderness, he brushed a lock of hair from his daughter's face. With the pad of his thumb, he wiped a tear from her dirty cheek. Paloma flinched at his touch, a reflex conditioned by months of cruelty. "Shoo," Arturo whispered, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "It's me, my Paloma. It's Dad." He opened his arms. "Come, my heaven. Come to Dad." That was the invitation that broke the dam. With a sob that seemed to come from the very depths of her being, Paloma crawled to him and clung to his neck. And then, for the first time in what felt like years, she truly cried. These were not the silent, frightened tears she was used to. It was a heart-wrenching, cathartic wail, a torrent of all the fear, loneliness, and misery she had stored in her small body. Arturo wrapped her in his arms, pressing her against his chest as if to fuse her to him, to protect her from the entire world with his own body. He rocked her gently back and forth, as his daughter's sobs shook his frame. And then he cried too. The soldier's tears fell freely, silent and burning, mixing with his daughter's, baptizing their reunion in shared pain. "I'm here now," he whispered in her ear, over and over like a mantra. "It's over. Dad is here. No one will ever hurt you again, I promise." After what felt like a lifetime, he stood up with Paloma still clinging to him, her face hidden in his neck. Without a single glance at Beatriz, who was now sobbing hysterically in a corner, he turned and walked out of the ruined kitchen. As he stepped into the sunlight, the outside world burst in. The crash had brought the neighbors out of their houses. Dona Consuelo was on her porch, a hand over her heart. Carmen, the neighbor from across the street, watched from her doorway with wide eyes. They saw the scene that confirmed all their whispers and fears. They saw Sergeant Arturo, the pride of the neighborhood, his face bathed in tears, holding his daughter who sobbed as if her life depended on it. They saw the shattered door behind him, and they saw the figure of Beatriz, peeking out, utterly broken. The lie had been shattered. The secret of the house at 12 Girasol Street was no longer a secret. Arturo stopped in the middle of the street, disoriented, with his precious cargo in his arms, not knowing where to go. His house was no longer a home. It was Dona Consuelo who moved. She came down the steps of her porch with an agility that belied her years and approached him. Her presence was an island of calm in the midst of chaos. "This way, son," she said in a soft but firm voice. "Come to my house. You'll be safe here." Arturo looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate gratitude. Without a word, he followed the old woman, crossed the street, and entered Dona Consuelo's small house, which smelled of cinnamon, coffee, and the peace he so desperately needed. The old woman closed the door behind them, leaving the neighborhood whispers and Beatriz's panic-stricken face outside. She led Arturo to her small living room, motioned for him to sit on an old sofa covered with a crochet blanket, and went to the kitchen. She returned with a glass of water for him and one of warm milk with honey for the girl. Arturo continued to rock Paloma, who was slowly beginning to calm down. Dona Consuelo sat across from them in her rocking chair. "True love needs no words," the old woman said in her wise, calm voice. "It is shown by offering shelter in the midst of a storm." She looked at Paloma with infinite tenderness. "Let the child cry, son. Tears cleanse the soul. You are home now." The hours that followed the storm passed in a haze of unreality. In Dona Consuelo's small, cozy house, time seemed to have stopped. Paloma, exhausted from a cry that had lasted for years, had finally fallen asleep in the guest-room bed, snuggled under a heavy, hand-woven wool blanket, a cocoon of safety after so much cold. Arturo sat in the living room with an untouched cup of coffee cooling in his hands. His gaze was fixed on a spot on the wall, but he saw nothing. His mind replayed the kitchen scene over and over, a hellish loop from which he could not escape. The initial shock had given way to a dull, heavy ache, a grief so immense it threatened to crush him. The soldier, the man of action, felt paralyzed. Dona Consuelo moved about the house in silence, giving him his space, but her presence was a calming anchor. Finally, she sat in her rocking chair opposite him. "The first step is the hardest, son. You've already taken it. You got her out of there." Her words seemed to awaken something in Arturo. The paralysis began to recede, replaced by the need to understand how this had happened. He took out his phone with hands that still trembled slightly and searched for a number. He needed a friend. He needed his brother in arms. Gabriel answered on the second ring. "Arturo, you made it okay? So it was just your paranoia." Arturo's voice broke as he spoke. "Gabriel." He had to stop to swallow the lump in his throat. "It's worse. It's so much worse than I could have ever imagined." In short, broken sentences, he told him what he had seen. The kitchen, the dog bowl, his daughter's tears. The silence on the other end of the line was total. But Arturo could feel his friend's disbelief and rage growing hundreds of miles away. That bitch," Gabriel's word was laden with venom. "Arturo, listen to me. Don't do anything stupid. Stay with the girl. I'm on my way. I'm taking the first bus out. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. You are not alone. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Arturo replied, a wave of relief washing over him at the knowledge he wouldn't have to face this alone. "Thank you, brother." After hanging up, a new urgency took hold of him. The rage needed a purpose. The truth needed to be pieced together. His mind focused on one detail, the money, the flower dress that never existed. He opened his bank's app on his phone. "Dona Consuelo," he said, his voice now firmer, "can I ask you something? My sister Beatriz, do you know if she's had money problems?" The old woman frowned. "Money problems? Not her, son. Quite the opposite. She and her husband Ruben are always showing off. New clothes. The brand new car they bought a few months ago. It always seemed strange to me, with Ruben only working odd jobs in construction." Arturo nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the phone screen. He scrolled through the history of transfers, month after month, year after year, regular, substantial amounts, money for Paloma's food, her clothes, her education, her birthdays. Money he had earned with sweat and risk, convinced he was giving his daughter a comfortable life. Now he saw the raw truth. He had been funding his sister's and brother-in-law's lifestyle at the cost of his own daughter's suffering. The cruelty wasn't just out of malice, it was out of a cold, calculated greed. Then he remembered the teacher, Mrs. Romero. With Dona Consuelo's help, he found the school's phone number and then the teacher's home number. When Mrs. Romero answered, Arturo introduced himself. There was a gasp of relief and horror from the other side. "Sergeant, thank God. I knew something was wrong." In a voice full of frustration and sadness, Mrs. Romero told him everything. Her suspicions, the bruises, Paloma's worn clothes, her terrified silence. She described Beatriz's masterful performance in her office, how she had denied everything and made her feel like the guilty one. "I'm so sorry," the teacher said. "I tried to help, but—" "You did more than anyone," Arturo interrupted gratefully. "You saw the truth. Thank you." He hung up the phone. He had the motive and the external corroboration. Only the most important piece was missing. Later that night, Paloma woke up. She saw her father sitting by the bed, and her eyes filled with a momentary fear, as if she thought it had all been a dream. Arturo took her little hand. "I'm here, my heaven. I'm not going anywhere." He sat on the edge of the bed, drawing her close. He didn't interrogate her. Instead, he did the only thing his heart dictated. He hugged her and whispered in her ear, "Forgive me, my Paloma. Forgive me for not being here. Forgive me for not protecting you. It's my fault, not yours." Perhaps it was that admission of guilt, that reversal of the burden she had carried for so long, that finally opened the door. In the safety of her father's arms, in the warmth of Dona Consuelo's house, Paloma began to talk. It was not a coherent narrative, but fragments of a long nightmare. "She made me say on the phone that I was happy, or else. Diego and Valeria took my crayons. Auntie said they needed them more. Once she locked me in the room all day because I didn't want to wash her clothes. She told me that if I said anything, you would never come back, that you would be angry with me." Every sentence was a stab in Arturo's heart. He listened to every word, memorizing every injustice, every act of cruelty. His pain was transforming into a cold, steely resolve. When Paloma finally fell asleep again, this time with a peace she hadn't known in years, Arturo tucked her in and kissed her forehead. He stood looking at her. His little warrior, his survivor. He had the victim's testimony, the thief's motive, and the witness's confirmation. The picture was complete. He went out to the living room, where the moonlight streamed through the window. The rage had passed, the pain was still there, but it was now contained by a new purpose, clear and sharp as a razor's edge. There will be no mercy, he thought as he waited for the dawn and for his friend. There will be no forgiveness. There will only be justice. Gabriel arrived the next afternoon, stepping off a dusty bus that looked like it had traveled from the end of the world. His face wore the same grim, determined expression Arturo had seen so many times on the battlefield just before a crucial operation. There weren't many words at first. The hug they shared on Dona Consuelo's porch was a sealed pact, a gesture of loyalty and unconditional support worth more than any speech. Gabriel greeted the old woman with solemn respect, taking off his hat, and then knelt to look at Paloma, who was hiding shyly behind her father's legs, peeking out with only one eye. "Hello, champ," Gabriel said with a surprising softness in his deep voice. "I'm a friend of your dad's. I've heard you're the bravest girl in the world." A small smile formed on Paloma's face before she hid again. That afternoon, while Paloma drew at the kitchen table under the watchful, warm gaze of Dona Consuelo, who had prepared her a fresh horchata, the two men sat on the porch. The battle plan was drawn up on a small wooden table. Arturo's rage was still burning, an incandescent ember that cried out for immediate, physical retribution. "I'll go to that house and drag Ruben out," Arturo said through gritted teeth. "I'll make him tell me every penny they stole, every time they laid a hand on my daughter." Gabriel stopped him, placing a firm hand on his arm. "And then what, Arturo? You end up in a cell for assault. And Beatriz will use that against you to fight for custody. She'll say you're a violent, unstable man. We can't give them that weapon." His voice was cold and strategic. "We'll do this the right way. The way that will hurt them the most. The way that will take everything from them, the money, the reputation, and any right over Paloma. We will dismantle them, piece by piece, legally." Arturo took a deep breath, his friend's logic cooling the fire of his anger. "It's just that I feel so guilty, Gabriel. I left her with them. I sent that money month after month, thinking I was taking care of her, when in reality, I was paying for her torture. You were deceived by your own sister, Arturo. The deceit of family is the hardest to see. But now your eyes are open, and we are going to use that truth as a battering ram." The plan was a two-pronged attack, a formal criminal complaint for multiple crimes and the immediate legal battle for permanent and total custody of Paloma, citing imminent danger. The next morning, they began. Their first stop was the public prosecutor's office in the municipal capital. Arturo had put on his dress uniform, not out of arrogance, but as a symbol of his service and seriousness. The place smelled of old paper and overly burnt coffee. They sat before a middle-aged prosecutor, a man with tired eyes who looked like he had seen it all. At first, his attitude was bureaucratic, almost indifferent, as Arturo began his story. But as the story unfolded, as Arturo presented copies of the bank statements, a long, methodical list of the transfers, the prosecutor's indifference transformed into a growing indignation. When Arturo described, in a choked voice, the scene he saw through the window, the man put down his pen and looked at him intently. "Sergeant," he said with a new gravity, "we are going to proceed with the full weight of the law." They called Mrs. Romero. The teacher arrived nervous but resolute, and her statement was devastating. She described the bruises, Paloma's withdrawal, and Beatriz's theatrical performance, painting a picture of chronic manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming. The next and most delicate step involved the DIF, the Family Services Agency. A social worker, a young and empathetic woman named Sophia, was assigned to the case. Understanding the fragility of the situation, she agreed to conduct the interview in the safety of Dona Consuelo's house. Sophia did not arrive with a notebook and a pen. She came with a box of cloth dolls representing a family. She sat on the floor with Paloma and for almost an hour, they simply played. Little by little, she asked Paloma to show her who was who. Paloma pointed to the largest doll with a flashy dress. "She's Aunt Beatriz." She pointed to a stooped doll. "He's Uncle Ruben." And to a very small, almost faceless doll. "This is me." Sophia asked her to show what they did during the day. With trembling hands, Paloma made the ant doll yell at the small doll and lock it in the doll box. Arturo, listening from the other room, felt his heart break all over again. With the social worker's report and the formal complaint in hand, the final confrontation came that same afternoon. 2 municipal police officers, Sirius and Burley, accompanied Arturo, Gabriel, and Sofia to the house on Girasol Street. The patrol car parked in front of the peach-colored facade was a silent bomb in the calm of the neighborhood. The curtains of the neighboring houses moved. The secret was dead. The scandal had just been born. Beatriz opened the door. Her face, swollen and pale, contorted upon seeing the official group. She tried her last card, that of the indignant victim. "Arturo, what is the meaning of this? Bringing the police to my house after everything I've done for you?" "The show is over, Beatriz," Arturo said, his voice pure ice. They entered. The interior of the house, with its flat-screen TV and new furniture, screamed the truth of the embezzled money. Ruben was sitting on the sofa, trembling like a leaf. When the lead officer began to read the accusations, child abuse, fraud, breach of trust, Beatriz's facade crumbled, but Ruben's shattered in an even more pathetic way. "I didn't know anything," he shouted, standing up and pointing at his wife. "I swear, she handled all the money. I told her not to be so hard on the girl, to treat her better. But she never listened to me. She's the one who locked her in the room for hours." Beatriz looked at him with absolute betrayal in her eyes. "Liar. Coward. You enjoyed the money as much as I did. You never complained about the new shoes or the car you drive. You laughed too when she tripped." The ugly truth of their complicity and their mutual selfishness was laid bare under the lights of their own living room. They blamed each other, revealing sordid details of their greed, their indifference, and their shared cruelty, all in front of the authorities who took note of every word. While the legal machinery began to turn, social justice, swifter and more relentless, was already in motion. The story of the decorated soldier and his abused daughter flew through the town. Beatriz felt its weight the next day. At the market, the women she used to gossip with now turned their backs on her. The butcher ignored her. In church, the priest spoke in his Sunday sermon about wolves in sheep's clothing who live among us, and everyone knew who he was referring to. She became a pariah, an outcast. The "what will people say" that she had cared so much about had become her sentence. That night, back in the safety of Dona Consuelo's house, a solemn calm reigned. Gabriel was preparing dinner, filling the house with the aroma of garlic and tomato. Arturo was sitting on the floor watching Paloma draw. She no longer drew a solitary soldier. Now she drew herself, small but smiling, holding hands with a large figure in uniform. Next to him, she had drawn another man, Gabriel, and a woman with white hair, Dona Consuelo. They were all together under a giant sun. Arturo watched her, and for the first time since his return, he felt something beyond the pain and fury. It was a cold, clean, and deeply satisfying feeling. It was the first breath of fresh air after a long, suffocating illness. Justice had begun its slow but inexorable path. The darkness was being dragged into the light, and they would pay for what they had done. The months passed, transforming the autumn into a mild, coastal winter. The roar of legal justice, which had at first been a deafening thunder, faded into a background murmur. One day, Arturo received a call from Gabriel. The final sentence had been handed down. Beatriz and Ruben, stripped of their pride and the house they had bought with tear-stained money, faced criminal charges and years of probation that would brand them forever. Arturo listened to the news in silence, standing in his small garden. He felt no surge of triumph or vengeful joy. He only felt a bleak, heavy relief, like a soldier who can finally lower his weapon after a battle that was far too long. He hung up the phone, closed his eyes, and breathed in the salty air. That chapter of their lives was finally closed. Their punishment was a footnote in the new, bright story that he and Paloma were just beginning to write. They had moved to a small fishing village, a handful of colorful houses clinging to a bay of calm waters. Their new home was a simple cottage, painted a brilliant blue like the midday sky, with a small garden where purple bougainvillea climbed the wall in an explosion of color. It wasn't large, but it was full of light. The first day, Arturo put the key in the lock and the door opened to an empty, sunny space that smelled of fresh paint and the sea. Paloma stood on the threshold, hesitant, as if afraid the place was another trap. Arturo smiled, lifted her into his arms, and carried her over the threshold. "Welcome home, my queen," he told her. She didn't smile, but she clung to his neck, a gesture of trust that meant everything to Arturo. Her new room was painted a sun yellow that she herself had chosen from a color chart, a direct defiance of the darkness of the storage closet that had been her cell. Healing was not a miraculous event, but a slow and patient weaving of everyday moments, of small acts of love that, day by day, repaired the broken threads of her trust. At first, the nights were a battlefield. Paloma would often wake up with a choked cry, trapped in the grip of a nightmare. Arturo, whose sleep had become as light as a sentry's, would run to her room to find her sitting up in bed, trembling, her eyes wide with a terror that did not distinguish past from present. He wouldn't shake her awake. He would sit beside her and begin to speak in a low, monotonous voice, describing the sound of the waves, the color of her blanket, the feel of his own hand, anchoring her to the present. "You're in our little blue house, Paloma. Can you hear the sea? It's Dad. You're safe." And he would stay there, sometimes for hours, until the trembling ceased and she fell back asleep, this time with his hand holding hers. Arturo dedicated himself with the tenacity of a soldier and the patience of a saint to giving Paloma back the childhood that had been stolen from her. One day, he came home with a large box tied with a bow. Inside was a beautiful white dress with embroidered yellow and blue flowers, almost identical to the one he had promised her on the phone. Paloma's eyes lit up, but she reached out and touched the fabric with her fingertips, as if needing to confirm it was real. "Is it for me?" she asked in a low voice. "Everything good in the world is for you, my Paloma," Arturo replied, kneeling before her. He helped her put it on. In front of the mirror, Paloma stared at the girl looking back at her. It was her, but different, more luminous. She did a slow twirl, and as the light fabric spun around her, Arturo felt he was watching the first bloom of a flower after a long, cruel winter. The kitchen, once a stage of terror, was transformed into their sanctuary. Arturo, who in his life had only ever known how to cook in military camps, became a culinary explorer. He discovered he had an unexpected talent for rice pudding and prepared it just the way she liked it, thick and with lots of cinnamon. On Sunday mornings, they established a ritual, making flour tortillas. At first, Arturo's tortillas came out misshapen, looking more like maps of unknown countries than circles. They would laugh, give them silly names, and eat them with beans and cheese. Soon, Paloma wanted to help. Her small hands covered in flour, her absolute concentration as she pressed the dough, her laughter when a tortilla puffed up on the griddle. Each of these moments was another brick in the fortress of their new life. The smell of cooked dough forever replaced the memory of the cold metal of a dog bowl. Her father's love was her refuge, but Arturo knew that some wounds needed an expert guide to heal. On the advice of the social worker, he found a child psychologist in a nearby city. Arturo would wait anxiously outside the office. The first few times, Paloma came out silent and exhausted. But after a few weeks, she started to emerge with a drawing in her hand, seriously explaining the monster she had drawn and locked in a crayon cage. One day, she came out smiling and told him, "Today I beat Dr. Anna at the memory game." That was the day Arturo knew the map was working. Their small family extended beyond their little blue house. Video calls with Gabriel and Dona Consuelo were a weekly event. Paloma, now more talkative, would proudly show the old woman her room, her drawings, and the shells she found on the beach. Dona Consuelo would tell her stories and teach her sayings, her wisdom traveling through the screen. Gabriel, for his part, remained the fun, surrogate uncle, telling bad jokes and asking Arturo if he had burned dinner yet. They had built a new family, smaller but infinitely stronger, bound by loyalty and genuine affection. One early morning, when the sky was just beginning to shift from deep indigo to pale gray, Arturo woke up. He felt a change in the stillness of the house. Paloma's bed was empty. A chill, an echo of old fears, ran through him for an instant. He jumped up and found her. She was standing by the open living room window, not crying, not scared, just calmly watching the sea before dawn. He rose silently and went to her side. He didn't ask her why she was awake. He simply took a blanket from the sofa and wrapped it around both of their shoulders, creating a small tent of warmth against the early morning chill. They stood like that, father and daughter, listening to the breathing of the ocean. Together, in a comfortable silence, they watched the daily miracle. They saw the horizon tinge with a soft pink, then a vibrant orange, and finally, a dazzling gold. The sun emerged from the water, majestic and new, tracing a path of brilliant light that seemed to reach directly to them. "Look, Paloma," Arturo whispered, his voice filled with a serene wonder. "It's a new day. It's the first of many." Paloma didn't answer with words. She leaned in and rested her head on her father's chest, listening to the steady, sure beat of his heart. Then she looked up at him, and Arturo saw it. For the first time, his daughter's smile reached her eyes without any shadow. It was not the shy smile of a frightened girl, nor the brave smile of a survivor. It was the pure, radiant, and carefree smile of a child who finally felt safe, of a child who was home. The road ahead would be long. The scars, though invisible, would always be part of their story, like the veins in a precious stone. But as Arturo held his daughter, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on his face and the comforting weight of her head on his chest, he knew with absolute certainty that they would no longer walk in darkness. They had each other, and they had all the sunrises in the world ahead of them. And that was more than enough. It was everything. What do we really see beyond the story of Arturo and Paloma? We see a fundamental and often uncomfortable truth, that the deepest darkness can nest in the places we call home, and that silence can be the most heart-wrenching scream. We see the brutal instant in which a father's illusion is shattered against a window, and how that single act of seeing, of truly seeing the unfiltered truth, becomes the unstoppable engine that changes everything. We see that paternal love has two faces. One is righteous fury, the destructive and necessary force to kick down a door and demolish a prison built of lies and cruelty. But the other face, quieter and even stronger, is the constructive force. It is the infinite patience to untangle nightmares, night after night. It is the tenderness to teach that hands can also be used to create, not just to hurt. And the dedication to relearn how to look at the sun alongside a soul that had grown accustomed to the shadows. We see the incredible resilience of the child's spirit. Paloma's story is not about fragility, but about a strength that refuses to be extinguished. Healing does not mean erasing the past, but learning to compose a new melody over the noise of old pains. It is proof that even in the most battered land, salted by tears, with the right care, a flower can grow again, timid at first, but finally radiant. Finally, this story teaches us that true justice is not the echo of a gavel in a courtroom, but the sound of a child's laughter in a safe place. Arturo's ultimate victory was not his sister's conviction, but Paloma's first genuine smile at the sight of the dawn. It reminds us that to save a soul, sometimes you have to demolish a world, but you must always, always build a new one with the infinite patience of love.